Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. When you turn on the news and see politicians arguing over trillion-dollar budgets, it's super easy to just tune out, right? But what if I told you those giant, abstract arguments are secretly dictating your future career, the value of your savings account, and even whether you'll be able to afford a car anytime soon? Today, we're breaking down the invisible force that actually shapes your economic reality. It's called fiscal policy.
Seriously, think about it. Will you actually find a job after graduation? Whether you're a high school senior picking a college major, a recent grad hunting for that first real salary, or honestly, just trying to save up some cash, the state of the economy is absolutely your business. Are companies going to be hiring? Will inflation just eat away your entire paycheck? Well, the government answers these questions directly through their policy choices.
All right, so what actually is fiscal policy? Well, simply put, it's the government's use of spending, taxation, and transfer payments to influence aggregate demand. Basically, it's the government's budgetary choices steering the overall path of the economy over time. And the ultimate goals here? Getting everyone who wants a job working and keeping prices nice and stable. Now let's draw a really sharp line here to clear up a super common mix-up. Fiscal policy is handled by the president and Congress, so it's all about how money is spent and collected through taxes. Monetary policy, on the other hand, is handled by the Federal Reserve. The Fed doesn't touch taxes at all. Instead, they control the actual supply of money and adjust interest rates. So, two different branches, two totally different toolkits.
Moving right along to Section 1, the government's economic toolkit.
Okay, I want you to picture the economy as a patient, and the government is the doctor who just arrived with a very specific set of medical tools. Every single decision the government makes regarding revenue coming in through taxes and capital expenditure going out makes up this overarching treatment plan. It's this massive, complicated balancing act of mobilizing resources and managing debt. So what's actually inside that doctor's bag? Well, we've got three primary instruments: taxes, government spending, and transfer payments. Taxes influence exactly how much you and businesses can spend. Government spending is direct purchasing. Think of things like buying a fleet of cars for federal employees or funding a massive new highway. And then transfer payments are programs like unemployment checks, where the government hands out money but doesn't get any actual goods in return. By pulling these three levers, the government can either speed up or slow down the entire economic machine. Let's dive into Section 2, two main fiscal approaches. Depending on whether our patient, the economy, remember, is suffering from a sluggish recession or is dangerously overheating with inflation, the doctor has to decide exactly how to use those tools. This leaves us with two main types of discretionary fiscal policy: expansionary and contractionary. Look at it this way. During a recession, the government uses expansionary policy. They lower taxes or increase spending to promote consumption, boost your purchasing power, and get people back to work. But what if the economy is overheating and inflation is skyrocketing? Then they use contractionary policy. The government will actually raise taxes and cut spending to reduce demand and keep prices from spiraling out of control. Naturally, expansionary policy is going to increase the national deficit, while contractionary policy decreases it. To really visualize this, think of a little gnome. Yeah, bear with me here, a gnome, holding a balloon labeled real GDP. During a recession, that balloon is looking pretty deflated. Expansionary policy is our gnome furiously blowing air into that balloon, expanding it back up to a healthy size. But if the balloon is overinflated and looks like it's about to pop from inflation, the gnome has to very carefully let some air out. That's contractionary policy, slowing things down safely so the whole economy doesn't just burst. All right, Section 3, every policy has trade-offs. Now, as you probably know, in economics, there's no such thing as a free lunch. These macroeconomic medicines always come with side effects. First up, the good stuff, the multiplier effect. When the government cuts taxes, you suddenly have more disposable income, right? So you go out and spend it. That money then becomes income for a local shop owner, who then goes and spends their new income. This incredible compounding chain reaction means an initial tax cut multiplies across the entire economy, boosting GDP way beyond just that initial dollar amount. But flip the coin and things get a little tricky. Economist Christopher Sims actually calls this intergenerationally unfair crowding out. That's a mouthful, but here's what it means. When the government runs huge deficits to stimulate the economy today, they have to borrow that money. This massive borrowing drives up interest rates, making it way harder for private businesses or, you trying to buy your first car or house to borrow and invest. You literally get crowded out. And if people realize taxes won't be raised to pay off this massive debt until decades later, That huge financial burden is essentially just handed directly to your generation.
Which brings us to Section 4, Time Lags in Politics.
You know how you can instantly transfer money on your phone? Yeah, changing the macroeconomic landscape is the exact opposite. It requires enduring a wildly frustrating waiting game. First, you have the recognition lag, waiting months for data to even prove we're in a recession. Then, the decision lag, politicians endlessly arguing over the actual policy. Next up is the implementation lag, actually passing the laws and distributing the funds. And finally, the effectiveness lag, waiting for that money to actually impact consumer spending and GDP. Honestly, by the time this entire timeline finishes, the original recession might already be over, and the government's new solution could accidentally cause massive inflation.
And why is that decision lag so excruciatingly long? Well, it's because the budget is actually an ethical document. Fiscal policy is deeply, deeply political. Who gets taxed more? Which social welfare programs are funded? Should we slap sin taxes on alcohol to discourage drinking? These aren't just simple math equations solved by a calculator. They reflect a society's very messy ethical priorities and concepts of justice, which makes getting any sort of agreement incredibly difficult.
Next up, Section 5. Context determines good policy. The right fiscal medicine depends entirely on who the patient is. For example, in a developing economy, fiscal policy isn't just about smoothing out some short-term bumps in the business cycle. It's used to actively build the very foundation of the nation, driving rapid capital formation, funding basic social overheads like schools and hospitals, and actively trying to reduce severe income inequality. The context completely shifts the goalposts of what good policy looks like.
Now, bringing it back to an advanced economy, just look at the 2020 recession. When the pandemic literally brought the world to a sudden, terrifying halt, the U.S. government didn't just wait around. They implemented massive expansionary transfer payments, like that $1.9 trillion relief bill. It was an extreme, super rapid deployment of fiscal policy, specifically designed to stimulate demand and just keep the economy afloat during an unprecedented shock.
Finally, Section 6, Fiscal Policy and You. So, the big question, how will the government's budget dictate your very first paycheck? Because everything we've talked about today, the deficits, the tax rates, the endless political arguing, they aren't just numbers on a whiteboard. They are the invisible forces that are going to dictate the interest rate when you try to buy your first home, the availability of entry-level jobs when you graduate, and ultimately how much you can actually save for your future. So pay close attention to the doctor's toolkit, because at the end of the day, you are the patient. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.